Well, don't look now, but NBC's Chris Sims is back talking Ravens football now that the official NFL regular season schedule has been unveiled. And based on some of his recent comments, I definitely have some thoughts in response. So, that and more is what I have coming up in this episode, which is brought to you by my friends at Preston Automotive Group. And with that, welcome into the channel. I'm Bobby Trosset, and as always, this is where I bring you Baltimore sports and beyond. Man, it's one of the best sport weekends of the entire year in this town. The 149th running of the Preakness Stakes at Pimlico goes down on Saturday, May 18th. And of course, Ravens legend Ray Lewis will be in attendance handling the Riders Up duties, announcing Riders Up prior to the 149th running at Pimlico. Looking forward to that. I'll be out there with a college buddy and some other friends. Hope to see you guys out there. It's just always a banner weekend in Baltimore. And of course, the Orioles kickstart a 3-game home series this weekend with the first place Seattle Mariners. So should be a good one all the way around. So, okay, Chris Sims has been a little bit unpolished, I think is probably the right word, as of late when it comes to Ravens analysis. And this video is no exception. While I don't disagree with everything he hits on, there's a couple key points which to me are egregious errors when it comes to looking at the turnover and looking at last year's Ravens team, projecting it up against what the 2024 squad is expected to look like. So here's Chris's comments. I'll react on the other side and give you some information in response.
One of the schedules I looked at and went, this is a little dangerous. A little dangerous in my opinion. I mean, again, hey, the Ravens, we know they're good, but for as good as they were last year, right, they had as much roster turnover as I can remember a team in the championship game having in recent history, right? When you look at it, all the old linemen that are gone, Patrick Queen's gone, right? I mean, they had a deep group of guys that are not on the team that they flipped over. I'm not saying they're not going to be good. I know this is the Ravens. They're going to be good, but like how good, how quickly? I guess that's what I'm saying, right? You lose 2 interior O linemen. Your tackles are gone. You got new guys there, new middle linebacker. The secondary is going to be completely different, right? So that's where Derrick Henry's new to the mix. So that's where I look at the Ravens and go, yeah, I know they're the Ravens. I know they're going to be good. I get it. But it's not exactly the same team that we saw last year. And, it's the Chiefs week 1. You could certainly be 0-1. The Raiders, again, chippy, we know that. But, I mean, again, the Cowboys, the Bills, the Bengals, I mean, you look at that and you go, hey, the Ravens aren't playing their best football there. They could be sitting there 2-3 or 1-4 a little bit and digging themselves in a hole. Like, there's real danger in that early part of the schedule, I guess is what I'm saying. It definitely opened my eyes a little bit when I first saw it.
Okay. So in no way do I want to downplay the opening month of the season because it's no joke. On the road at Kansas City, home against Vegas, you'd like to think that the home opener is a win against a lesser Raiders squad. On the road at Dallas, home primetime Bills, Sunday Night Football. That's no joke. If you come out of there 3-1, that is a major win to kick off your year. So in no way am I downplaying whatsoever the severity of the schedule. And speaking of severity and strength of schedule, no team aside from Cleveland has it trickier than the Ravens do this year when it comes to opponent win percentage from a year ago. The Ravens have the second most difficult strength of schedule in the entire league. And Sarah and I have covered this stat in recent days, but just in case you missed it, Cleveland, Baltimore, and Pittsburgh are your top 3 most difficult schedules in 2024. Houston and Green Bay round out the top 5. Cincinnati's down in the middle of the pack. So, and by the way, the 5 primetime games, even though that's 1 away from the max of 6, the Ravens have several standalone games, including Christmas Day against Houston on the road. But all in all, they'll have 7 nationally televised games. So the league clearly is telling you how it feels about Lamar and the Baltimore Ravens. Now, To get back to some of Chris's comments on the turnover and what they're losing and what they've already lost. He writes, or he spoke, I transcribed it on Twitter. He said, you lose 2 interior O linemen. That's true. Factual, right? Kevin Zeitler, gone in free agency. John Simpson, gone in free agency. Now, in fairness, aside from Zeitler, there was a lot of question marks about the left guard position this time last year, much like there are now. You can feel relatively good or optimistic about Joe D'Alessandris' offensive line room, the depth that they have at the position, and the ability to fill that. New middle linebacker, he cites. Obviously, with Patrick Queen having been lost to free agency in Pittsburgh, it's a big opportunity for Trenton Simpson. Trenton balled out. Yes, it was a small sample size. Yes, it was against a Pittsburgh team in the regular season finale that was lesser. But then again, it is Pittsburgh, and Trenton looked like he belonged, right? And belongs. Well, where he belongs now is right alongside Roquan, because that's the opportunity he's going to have. His first full season as a starter will come alongside an all-pro, a perennial Pro Bowler, and somebody who the Ravens, I'm sure there is zero buyer's remorse for the investment that they made in Agent Zero a couple years ago. Okay, so that's not much of a worry. Will there be growing pains and a learning curve? No doubt. He then goes on to say the secondary is going to be completely different. How? Geno Stone is lost in free agency, gets a big bag, right? Goes to Cincinnati. Good for him. 7 interceptions, came out of nowhere, former 7th round pick. Unbelievable year, career year, gets paid, deservingly so. Ravens weren't going to have a chance to do that. They weren't willing to do that, not with all the depth that they have in that department with Kyle Hamilton, Marcus Williams, right? You've got Ardarius Washington at safety from a depth standpoint. They drafted one out of Purdue, Sanusi Kane. Okay, but at corner, you've got Marlon coming back, hoping for a bounce back, healthy season, right? You drafted a couple corners. Brandon Stevens is coming off a career year. By the way, the 2 that you drafted, one's a first rounder out of Clemson, who a lot of people are referring to as the best cover corner in the entire draft. And then not to mention TJ Tampa, a value pick in the mid rounds, who a lot of people felt like could have been much, much higher had he tested better. So the secondary being completely different. By the way, this time last year, if he's referring to Ronald Darby, wasn't even on this team, wasn't even in their plans. Arthur Mollett was re-signed. He'll be back, handling nickel duties and whatever else is asked of him. He's a dog. So I just don't really follow the logic. They could be sitting there 2-3 or 1-4 and digging themselves a hole. Of course, there's a possibility of that happening. But citing what I just read to you from that transcription, doesn't exactly match up. And I don't mind Chris. I think he's a fine guy. Pretty solid football analyst, too. I learn a lot when I listen to him. But he hasn't been as polished and as accurate lately when it comes to the Ravens, specifically when it comes to the turnover and roster construction and the differences between 23 and 24. Now, the Ravens schedule, Warren Sharp put together his thinking hat and analytics. The Ravens schedule weeks 1 through 5 is the hardest in the NFL, according to his. That's opponent forecast wins based on 2024 season win totals, updated as recently as the 15th, yesterday. I'm taping this at 3:30 at the moment on Thursday the 16th, the day after the schedule release. They're on the road at Kansas City. They're on the road at Dallas. They're on the road at Cincinnati within the first 5 weeks. That also includes home games against Buffalo and Las Vegas, as we already covered. 4 of the 5 of those that I just mentioned are against teams expected to win 10-plus games, according to Warren's metrics. After that gauntlet, they play the NFL's 14th easiest schedule to close the year and face just 2 teams expected to win 10-plus games. Again, back to the metrics that you see here on the screen that Warren utilizes. Now, remember, while that might be the case, 14th easiest, really hard to forecast how teams are going to turn around. Look at Houston, i.e. last year. Nobody expected them to go to the playoffs. Nobody expected CJ Stroud to be the overwhelming rookie of the year candidate. But yet they were there and they faced the Ravens in the divisional round playoff game. And through a half, hung tough through one half. Where I'm going with this is, let's not forget that December 15th to the 25th marks a stretch of 10 days for the Ravens in which they will play 3 games. So while the analytics tell you that after the first 5 weeks, the Ravens play the 14th easiest schedule to close the year, I'm looking into some other factors as well. I'm looking into health. I'm looking into, and again, that's impossible to forecast at this point health-wise. But there's no question that right off the bat, it ain't going to be easy. It's going to be really difficult for this team right out of the bat. And to be honest with you, if you come out of that 5-week stretch 3-2, again, I think that's a win too. That is a win. Kansas City, Dallas, Cincinnati, and Buffalo. Those are all big time games. Vegas is the only one that you can really confidently feel like that you can predict. Now, maybe some of you diehards out there are like, oh, what are you talking about? They're going in 5-0. Well, I'm trying to look at this objectively. More on the other side of this. This episode is brought to you by my friends at Preston Automotive Group. And at Preston, Bobby Baltimore subscribers receive 2 exclusive offers, $500 towards a new or pre-owned vehicle, or when you buy 4 tires, you'll receive 50% off your alignment. You've got over 2,000 vehicles to shop from. Home delivery is available. You'll be joining the Preston team along with Ravens safety Kyle Hamilton, tight end Mark Andrews, myself, and many more throughout the Baltimore area and beyond. Cars cost less with Preston. You can get started today by visiting PrestonMotor.com or just simply scan the QR code in the upper right-hand corner. All that information can be found in the show notes below. You've got a site operator available to you 24/7. You've got available inventory. You can break it down by different categories, price range, vehicle type, year, make, model, location, dealership. So I've really enjoyed my partnership with Preston Automotive, and obviously I enjoy rolling around in a 2023 Ford Bronco Sport. So here's an interesting slide that I wanted to get to. Brian Burke of ESPN used ESPN Analytics to put together a chart that shows the best net rest differential, and it dates back to 2002. So over a 20-year sample size in the NFL. Okay. According to this chart, Baltimore and New England, both the 2024 Ravens and 2024 Patriots, are benefiting from rest days versus opponents. Okay. So Baltimore has a number of Thursday night games, as we know, once off the top, then again later on in Cincinnati in November, if I'm not mistaken, or it's a home game, but against Cincinnati. That's your second Thursday night matchup because the first one doesn't necessarily count from an NFL perspective because they're not viewing that as having a short week going into it. Okay. So 2 Thursday night games and a Wednesday game at 4:30 on Christmas Day against the Houston Texans. So with that, the best net rest differential since 2002 belongs to the Ravens. And look at this. You've got teams that, again, it dates back all the way to 2002. So because of how unorthodox the Ravens schedule is, probably because Christmas falls on a Wednesday, I'm sure that gives them a little bit of an advantage here. This is probably something that isn't being talked about enough. As difficult as the Ravens schedule is when it comes to opponent win percentage from last year and the amount of playoff teams, right? And the games that they will have, which is 10 against playoff teams from a year ago, they're actually going to be relatively set up well from a rest standpoint. Not to mention that going into that 10-day stretch where they'll have 3 games, they have their bye week prior. So it all evens out, and I have to give the NFL credit for the way in which it went about this, because I read from actually I received a note, a memo from the NFL yesterday via email that said, in terms of like schedule combinations and scenarios, there could be as many as a quadrillion of them. So this isn't exactly an easy process to nail down and master, which brings you back to the COVID days when there were a bunch of reschedules and postponements. I mean, that must have been a nightmare for the scheduling committee. But this is something right here that Brian Burke noted on Twitter that to me is relevant. And when you think about some of the unusual, unorthodox wrinkles to this year's schedule for the Ravens, keep this in mind as well as you move forward. That bye week is super late. And I mean, as late as you could possibly be, week 14 to be exact, with 5 other teams: Denver, Houston, Indianapolis, New England, and Washington. Okay. Bye weeks begin in week 5 and they run all the way through week 14 with a couple skips in there as well. Jamison Hensley noted something that's interesting. Perhaps if history repeats itself, you'll enjoy this. The Ravens bye week is the 14th, like I mentioned. It's their latest in 24 years. The last time that happened, the 2000 Super Bowl winning season. The first bowl as a franchise with Brian Billick and company, all the way back in 2000. Both of the Ravens' Monday Night Football games are on the road this year. You know, Harbs is going to have something to say about that, because over the last 20 years, Baltimore has played 20 Monday Night Football games away from home. 20, count them, 20, and that's tied with the New York Giants for the most in the NFL. Harbs has spoken out on this before. I would have to think he might be doing that again. But the NFL, I don't know how much ground he has to stand on this year because of the 7 nationally televised games, the 5 primetime games, the Christmas Day standalone, right? There's going to be a lot of opportunities for a national audience to see what Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens are all about this year. So some interesting stuff there. We're working our way towards OTAs. We're working our way towards mandatory mini camp, and training camp will follow that. It's a fun time of year. The Orioles are in full swing playing great baseball. Like I mentioned at the top, Preakness is kicking off this weekend, and I'm just looking forward to being a part of all of it. So I appreciate you guys, as always, for dropping by the channel. If you haven't already done so, like the video, subscribe, and check me out on Patreon if you want to support. Paul Bauer and Chris Paulus do exactly that. This is their monthly shout out that they receive for a $4.99 monthly rate. Means a lot, guys. Appreciate you for dropping by, as always. And I will talk to you guys soon here inside the channel. We'll have more content coming up, more interviews, more everything as we work our way through the NFL offseason.